Good evening, everyone. This is ATC Weekly News coming at you from Long Island, New York with your host, me, Jacob Rivelli. Today, we have a special treat for you as we're looking into the top 5 deadliest crashes that occurred due to ATC in Russia, of all places, just to spice things up. And unfortunately, someone forgot to pay the electric bill, so things are a little bit dark in here. But these accidents and incidents took place due to sleepy air traffic controllers, misread information, and just plain old breaking the rules. We hope you enjoy this week's broadcast. Starting at number 5, we have Aeroflot Flight 191. This was a Soviet domestic passenger flight from Vancouver International to Ashgabat International, with a stopover in Turkmenbashi International. On the 5th of March in 1963, the Ilyushin IL-18, which is the aircraft in question, crashed while landing at Ashgabat International, and here's how. The sky was covered by cumulonimbus clouds with a lower boundary of 600 to 1,000 meters. The visibility was roughly 4 to 10 kilometers. The weather was expected to deteriorate with a dust storm containing northwestern winds at about 18 to 20 meters a second, and resulting in a visibility of less than 1,000 meters. According to such data, the crew could have completed the flight before the weather worsened, but it worsened much faster than expected, and the weather forecaster of Ashgabat International issued the new data to them. However, the weather forecaster at Krasnodar Airport did not inform the crew about the change in forecast. Later on, they transmitted the new data of the dust storm, but it was too late as the aircraft was already in it and could not receive the transmission. The air traffic controller did not try to reach the aircraft again, or try to redirect the aircraft to an alternate airport, as landing in Ashgabat would be close to impossible. As the aircraft descended and approached for landing, they hit major turbulence. They then began to roll and eventually hit a telephone pole. They hit the ground and landed 1,000 feet away from the end of the runway. The cockpit was completely destroyed and lost both wings. Unfortunately, only 12 of the 54 people on board were killed, which included all 8 crew members. Moving on forward, we have number 4, which is Aeroflot Flight 663. This was another Soviet passenger flight from Tbilisi International Airport to Krasnodar International that crashed on the 24th of August in 1963. The crash involved an Aeroflot Avia 14. According to the weather forecast, a thunderstorm was expected on the main flight route, with stratocumulus and cumulonimbus clouds having a lower limit of 600 to 1,000 meters and a horizontal visibility of 4 to 10 kilometers. The pilot knew that there were thunderstorms on the main route, from Kutaisi to Sukhumi, while on the roundabout, weather conditions were good. A flight that left Kutaisi earlier determined that the main route of Sukhumi was impossible, therefore requested permission to follow the detour route. However, the crew of Flight 663 did not receive this information before departure. This was probably caused by the fatigue of the pilot, who at the request of the deputy chief at the airport, was delayed from the night shift and had been working for around 14 hours. At around 10 UTC, the control tower was informed that cloud cover had dropped from 1,100 to 450 meters. However, this information was also not communicated to the crew of Flight 663 either. When the crew tried to circumvent the thunderstorm in the conditions of limited visibility, they did not notice that they were right on the mountains. The lack of visibility and communication resulted in the aircraft colliding with the mountain. Ultimately, the air traffic controllers allowed a visual flight at an altitude of 1,500 meters in a mountainous area without meteorological conditions. And the air traffic controllers at Kutaisi Airport did not prohibit the departure and did not warn the crew about the clouds, instead giving instructions to fly at an altitude of 1,500 meters, an altitude dangerous during the weather conditions. All 27 passengers and 5 crew on board were killed. Going on to number 3, we have Aeroflot Flight 5463. And yet again, another Soviet domestic passenger flight, this time going from Chelyabinsk to Almaty, which crashed on the 30th of August in 1983 while approaching Almaty. The Tupolev Tu-134A collided with the western slope of Dolan Mountain at an altitude of 690 meters, or otherwise known as 2,260 feet. During this flight, the aircraft was on course to go above the mountain, but Due to ATC's request, the aircraft went down to an altitude that was on par to collide with the mountain. The crew knew this due to prior information on the course of the flight, but decided to abide by ATC even though they didn't have to. As the controller figured out what was happening, he gave them a ground proximity warning, but it was too late. As a result of the accident, all 90 people on board were killed. Sliding in at number 2 is Aeroflot Flight 8381, and this was an interesting scenario, and the only one on this list involving a mid-air collision. It was a scheduled flight of a twin-engine Tupolev Tu-134 that departed from Tallinn Airport in Estonia on the 3rd of May in 1985 for Chisinau, and making a stopover in Lviv in the Ukraine. While descending to Lviv in overcast weather, it collided with a Soviet Air Force Antonov An-26 that had just taken off from Lviv. The collision occurred at an altitude of 13,000 feet. Both aircraft lost their right wings and tails, went out of control, and crashed about 1 or 2 minutes later near the village of Zolochiv in the Ukraine, killing all 94 people on both aircraft. Civil and military air traffic controllers mislocated both aircraft involved, leading to violations of air traffic control rules. And finally, at the big number 1, we have Aeroflot Flight 3352. And this was a Tupolev Tu-154 aircraft and a flight on a domestic route from Krasnodar to Novosibirsk, with an intermediate landing in Omsk. While landing at Omsk Airport on the 11th of October in 1984, the aircraft crashed into maintenance vehicles on the runway. While a chain of mistakes in airport operations contributed to the accident, its major cause was an air traffic controller falling asleep on duty. During this time, 3352 was looking to land at Omsk Airport, and the visibility at the time was IFR. While asking for clearance to land, the approach controller asked the ground and flight controller if it was possible. He was given a vague response of "re" from the ground, which he heard as "free." This approach controller cleared the landing, though unable to see the runway, and in spite of regulations that required him to keep the flight in the air and double-check the runway status. Both the ground controller and secondary controller should have been able to see the runway, but the former was asleep and the latter was absent due to staff shortages. The aircraft came into land and collided into maintenance vehicles on the runway. As of 2020, this remains the deadliest aviation accident on Russian territory, with a total of 178 deaths, which included 4 people on the ground. And that brings us to a close, ladies and gents. I hope you enjoyed hearing about some of the worst accidents that happened due to ATC in Russia. And as much as it is disheartening to hear about all these deaths, it's important to understand how important regulations and rules are to keeping people safe, especially in the aviation industry. This is Jacob Rivelli on the ATC Weekly News, Top 5, signing off. Have a wonderful day.